Hello?
R. Eric Thomas. Oh my God. Hi, it's Jeffrey Masters. I'm so glad you picked up.
Oh, hello. Of course.
Don't freak out, but we are recording.
No worries. All my phone calls are recorded as well.
Oh, good. That's great to know. So I wanted to call you because we are about to play the interview that you and I recorded in person when your memoir, Here For It, came out. And I wanted to call and check in because you also have a brand new book coming out, and that is called The Kings of Be More.
I do. Yeah. I love that we are able to sort of bridge these two conversations because, Here For It is a memoir and Kings of Be More is a YA novel that feels very much in the same world. It's set in Baltimore, but, because it's fiction, anything can happen. And it's just kind of a romp, It's inspired by Ferris Bueller's Day Off. And I just really wanted to create a world where two Black, queer 16-year-olds could have a magical day-long adventure.
Right. And so at the heart of the book, the heart of their relationship between the two teenagers you mentioned, it's a friendship. It's not a romance.
Yeah.
Why did you want to explore that?
Oh, I think platonic love is so important. And I think, as much as we see on-screen depictions of first loves, that's wonderful. That's great. I think the way that a lot of us learn about love is by loving our friends. And for queer people, I think that has been the lifeline for a lot of us. Family of choice is a huge component of queer life. And family of choice starts with finding one person who is your friend and your introduction to a larger scene or a larger way of understanding yourself. I think it's so important to see depictions of friends who love each other, friends who are like, we have thought through whether we're attracted to each other, we are not, and that is fine, and it is not an issue, and we're not eventually going to fall in love. It is okay to love your friends, to hug your friends, and to not want to marry your friends or kiss your friends. It's also okay to want to kiss your friends if your friends want to kiss you back. But platonic love, I think, is underrepresented, and I think it's super important.
I love what you said, and I also think, this is a theory, so feel free to disagree, but I also think that we have trained audiences to see two people on screen or on the page, and if they're both men and they're both gay, we've trained them to think that they are going to be love interests and bang, 100%.
Yeah.
Like the only options for queer characters.
Yeah. No, I think that's it. And I think, even you look at the cover of the book and people are like, oh, are they gonna hook up? Are they gonna fall in love? And it's like, I want to pull a billboard in Times Square that's like, they are actually just friends. We're dangerously close in depictions of young gay relationships to a place where you kind of can't see two young men or two young women who are adorable and think, oh, that this is all their relationship is going to be. I don't think that friendship is the JV version of a relationship. Friendship can be the be all and end all. It can be the most fulfilling part. So I think it's really important to highlight that.
That is really profound. And also when it comes to books, we have this whole genre called romance. Mm-hmm. And when it comes to intimate friendships, that doesn't fit as squarely for marketing materials.
Yeah, and I get it. It's harder because we don't have a very wide vocabulary when we talk about intimacy. And it's part of our larger cultural problem. We're afraid of each other. We're afraid of being close to each other. We're afraid of showing affection. And then when we do show affection, we're like, oh, well, this must mean that we're in love. And it's like, there are a lot of different shades of affection, of care, of being in love. And someone who's been in relationships, someone who's married, sometimes it's easier just to have a friend who at the end of the night, you're like, well, good night. This was wonderful. I can't wait to see you tomorrow. I'll text you when I get home. I'm going back to my place where all my stuff is, and I don't have to think about anybody else. I love that.
So the new book is called The Kings of Be More. Should we jump in and listen to the interview?
I think so.
Then one more question, putting you on the spot. Can you say the name of the podcast with me in unison? Okay, go. So from The Advocate magazine in partnership with GLAAD, this is LGBTQ and A with R. Eric Thomas, author of The Kings of Be More. Let's hear it. Go.
Sorry, I was like, oh God.
I love the book, and also I couldn't believe how, and I don't mean this rudely, but how moving and touching it was.
No, I take that in the spirit in which it's offered. I knew that people would be surprised, considering that most people know me from my Elle columns, which are heightened voice and all comedic. I've written maybe 6 or 7 serious op-eds for Elle, where I just sort of like was vulnerable and open to vein. But most of the time I'm like playing a heightened version of myself. And I was really nervous actually that people would like open the book and be like, I was looking for jokes. And my editor and my agent have been very, very patient with me in saying, there are like 6 jokes per page. It's okay to say like, also, it hurt my feelings when I was gay bashed or whatever.
Yeah.
I feel like that's the truest version of myself. I am always reaching for humor. I'm always reaching for joy, but also like that reaching involves like pushing through pain and moments of deep suffering, which is what it is to be human.
Of course.
Yeah.
And one of the moments that stuck with me after reading the book, after like a week,
Mhm.
and it's really small, but it was about your parents and what they sacrificed for you and your brother growing up.
Yeah.
And you wrote that for a 10-year period, your parents didn't buy a single piece of new clothes for themselves.
Yeah. I always struggle to describe to people like the breadth of their sacrifice. And that little detail about the clothes actually is something that my mother just mentioned offhand. I was like maybe midway through writing the book. And I went back and I just like rewrote that essay with that in mind.
That's so recent to learn.
Yeah, yeah. And because it was just, and it's, I say in the essay, their way of describing that period in their lives is just so offhand and casual. This is just what we had to do. My father would get up at like 5 a.m, or no, he would be on the road at 5 a.m. delivering newspapers and then go to his full-time day job as a manager. And then like was very active in the church as well. And that was a full job for him. And my mother, I was thinking the other day, my mother was trained as a classroom teacher. And then she took care of my brothers and I for 16 years, or my brothers and me. So she took all that energy and put it into our home life. So there was constant educational stimulation. There was constant like field trips, like actual field trips with no money. I think about my life right now. If I had had a child when my parents had me, I'd have probably an 11-year-old right now. I can't handle that. And 2, the idea of living such a hugely different life, not even considering that I'd be able to get the things that I want, let alone need, mending holes and like waking up at the crack of dawn. And I don't know, it's stunning to me. It really is.
Yeah, I think about that all the time too, like where my parents were and where I am.
Yeah.
I just moved to New York, like
Yeah.
and I was able to make that choice on my own and execute it in like 6 weeks.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
And I like love that I can only have to rely on myself. It's like feels so luxurious.
Right. I often think though, and I wonder what you think of this, like I wonder about whether I'm experiencing a wide enough version of life. Like I don't think sacrifice is necessary to sort of like fully feel human, but I also wonder about like, when you have children, particularly, like you also have to think outside of yourself a lot. And I think I'm pretty empathetic. I think outside of myself a lot. But like, I wonder if there's another even deeper version of me that could be out there if I had to like make harder or more complicated choices. Does that make sense, or am I just being weird?
It makes sense, but I don't think about that for me personally, just because like that thought process of who I could be is like endless.
Oh yeah, that's true.
Yeah. I grew up in the South, and I think about it in terms of queerness in like California, or just in the last 9 years. And had I been able to be this like loud, flamboyant queer person, they describe me as animated growing up. He's so animated, which is coded queer.
Yeah.
Right. And I like really like tone down my personality. And I also have like a very dark sense of humor, which I like. But I wonder like how much of these personality traits would be different had like my childhood been different.
Yeah. I think about that a lot, and obviously like going through the process of writing the book, I was like reevaluating all these different influences that I had. And one thing I don't mention in the book is that my father was accepted into Dallas Theological Seminary, which is, I believe, a Baptist seminary. I don't know. But I believe we were Baptist, so I would presume so. I had just gotten out of kindergarten. And we were going to go, and the only reason we didn't go was because I brought home chickenpox from school on the last day of kindergarten. And so all 3 of us, my brothers and I, got chickenpox, and we couldn't sell the house because we couldn't show the house. So we couldn't move because we didn't have, enough moving money. And I think, what would my life have been like if I had grown up in someplace in Dallas or Dallas adjacent underneath the arches of this conservative seminary? Like I'd either be a complete lunatic, or maybe I wouldn't even be out. even to myself, And there's many, I know there's many different iterations of what that could be, but it's stunning to me, like little things that could completely shift my life.
That's fascinating. Also, just like so much chance involved,
Oh,
too.
absolutely. Absolutely.
That's so interesting about your father was accepted to seminary school and you grew up going to church. And now I was surprised to read you're married to a pastor.
Yeah. If I were like structuring this as like a movie, it'd be like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. I did not seek this out. I really didn't. I was looking for a church home for a long time, and I wanted to be a part of an open and affirming congregation because spirituality is very important to me. But I had a lot of trouble finding that for various reasons. A lot of churches that are open and affirming, I found their style of worship was very different from what I'm used to. I'm very used to a charismatic style of worship. And then when I found my husband's church, I also found my husband. And I was like, well, I can either be a congregant or I can be trade. And I was like, well, I'll choose trade. So I couldn't go to his church for a long time. All that has been resolved now, but now people are like, oh, you're a pastor's wife, you wear like the big church hat, and I don't, because it's sort of like going to church now, going to my husband's church is sort of like, if I was married to a banker and going to like watch him count money, I'm very aware of the machinations and the day-to-day work of it.
But you don't feel any obligation to have like an added bit of like decorum or to cuss less or something?
No. Oh my
really?
God, no. I write in the book about white church and black church, and he is a white. And so there is just a different understanding of what decorum is. I came in there thinking I was going to have to like wear a 3-piece suit, and like my little church fan. And instead they're like, just come as you are. And I was like, oh no, I can't do that.
Did it ever give you pause in the beginning dating a pastor?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, like I didn't feel I look back and I think to myself, I try to interrogate my thought process and wonder whether there was ever a period where I was like, oh, this is weird. This is the church. There were moments where he would put on like the black pastor's shirt and the collar, and that felt very foreign and strange because it was very clear that he was the church. But again, like it didn't feel like any version of the church that I knew growing up. I didn't go to white churches even to visit, and I didn't sort of understand. Like his church ends an hour sharp, and I was like, we're just getting started. Like I come from a church culture where you show up whenever and you leave 9 hours later. I mean, not really 9 hours, but like 3-4 hours. Dinner afterwards. So it just felt so different that it almost seemed like it was a reinvention or a completely different idea of church.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so now that you are married to a pastor and it's such a big part of your life, like has that changed your relationship to religion?
A little bit. Yes, actually. He went to Princeton Theological Seminary. And so he has a really intellectual understanding of religion and Christianity and the Bible. And he knows Greek and Hebrew, and he's read the Bible in Greek and Hebrew. And so like there are times where we'll be talking about some idea or whatever, and he'll say like, well, in Hebrew, this word means this, and so that it's been translated as this, but that's actually not what it really means. It means this thing, and that's how people are getting things wrong. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, he has receipts, and I'm just like, no, I heard on a podcast. That's what you're supposed to do. So a lot of my understanding of faith was sort of, I think, very basic, and so being in a relationship with him has sort of elevated that. The thing about intellectualizing something like faith, though, is that it doesn't feel like magic anymore. There's a thing that's ineffable and inexplainable, but also there are ways of tracking back through human history where these ideas come from. It involves being a lot more analytical, I think, about what I consider to be right and true, both in terms of like capital F faith, and also just in terms of like how I exist in the world,
I mean, I thought it was interesting in the book that you skipped over the traditional coming out story where you tell your parents and write about their reaction.
Yeah.
Can you talk about making that decision?
Yeah, absolutely. So the lens of the book is really about otherness. And so I was trying to be very deliberate about showing people who I am without demonstrating my otherness. I didn't want to write a book that took the position that I was different and that everyone needed and that I had to like invite people into this weird and exotic world of being a human being. And also, the moments of coming out were we just felt deeply personal, and like it's actually like a good story that I never tell. And so like the person who loves drama inside of me is like, oh no, I need to tell this story. And the rest of me is like, no, this is something that you don't have to like open that vein for people to understand who you are. I wanted to write a book that people could find themselves in without having to make myself overly accessible. You know what I mean? I wanted to be vulnerable without parading around my difference. And which is no shade to anybody who's written about their coming out. I think those are very, very important stories. But I didn't feel like that was, from a dramatic point of view, it also didn't sort of track in the story of the book.
It's just amazing that we're at this place, actually,
Yeah.
that a queer writer can write a memoir and not write that scene,
Yeah.
because it would have been required.
Absolutely.
Even like 5 years ago.
Right. And that's the thing. A lot of people, there have been so many people who have made this possible for me. Like I couldn't have written this book, like you say, like 5-10 years ago. And so I'm very, very grateful for that. But I'm also trying to embrace the gift that they've given me and tell a different story. Years ago, this book would have, if it existed at all, it would have probably focused on one aspect of my identity, probably my queerness. And so it would be sort of that arc. And because of the writers that came before me and put in the work and showed me how to come out and showed me how to write about myself and understand myself, I get to tell a different story, tell a new story.
And I think a lot of these stories you're telling, you mentioned it's about being an outsider, but it's also like dispelling queer myths.
Mm-hmm.
And it made me think that there's so many myths and stereotypes about queerness that other people assume, but we also grow up thinking them too.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
One of the things you wrote, I wrote it down. You were talking about the buildup about being out and finding queer community.
Mm-hmm.
And you wrote, it's strange when the thing behind the door isn't terrifying or wonderful, but rather just plain. When you find your people and realize they're just people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, like I love queer community. I love being in queer spaces. I love discovering new ways of finding and maintaining queer community. And I love the magic and the spectacle of that. But I also love the basic, boring humanity of it. And, there's a thing, like, I grew up idolizing this Nancy Meyers version of life where you've got a huge kitchen island and nothing is ever dirty and you have a little snack drawer in your refrigerator. I don't know what goes in the snack drawer, like snacks, I guess. And I didn't have, but it was really like me idolizing a version of plain, normal Americanness that I just didn't have access to. Also wealth, And I love that in our community, we can absolutely embrace the spaces where we differ from the larger heterosexual community and the places that we find ourselves really digging deep into spectacle and difference and performance. But I also love that we can be boring. That's freedom. There's freedom in being like really, really unexceptional, And there's freedom in, like I'm at a point, I'm 38, and I'm married and we're trying to make new friends. We live in Baltimore and we moved there a couple of years ago. So we have like dinner parties with other queer couples. And it's like 4 queer people sitting around a tall kitchen table, drinking a bottle of wine and like talking about replacing the washing machine because it's leaking. And that is true liberation, It's a version of true liberation. I'm worried I sound problematic. I think it's a privilege to be able to be boring. And I appreciate that privilege.
I don't think you sound problematic, but what I got from that part of the book is that we've inadvertently trained people to think that to be gay, and specifically gay men, less so with like women and trans folks, but to be gay is to have big wigs and lip sync and glitter. And that is an aspect of gay life, but we've even somehow convinced ourselves or queer people that is only the way to be queer.
Yeah. And I think, I think a lot of that is the straight gaze invading queer life. And I feel like the same is true in my understanding of Blackness. Like I grew up with the Cosby Show, and as much as that is not something that is a good place to revisit anymore, the idea of the Huxtables was really, really potent to me because they were a happy family who faced the same kind of challenges that the family on Family Ties, Growing Pains faced, as opposed to every challenge being rooted in their Blackness and their difference. And I think both stories are important. I think it's important to say, like, going through the world because I'm queer or because I'm Black, I will have different experiences, but also I get to go through the world as a human being. I get to go through the world as a human being who wants love and wants community and does my laundry and goes to the grocery store just like anybody else. And so, when I notice within my understanding of Blackness that like those little ideas that like, oh, I should be this kind of Black person or I should perform in this kind of way, I realized that's not Blackness talking, that's white supremacy talking through Blackness. And the same thing is true of queerness, I think. I think it is inherent to want to express yourself, whoever you are. And I think that, there are so many wonderful ways of expressing yourself as a queer person. But I think often we get trapped in trying to perform to an audience that is ultimately hostile to our own existence. And I want to push back on that.
And I think another part of the queer experience that you push back on, or maybe it's an assumption that I made, but I believe it was your second year of college and you were loosely dating somebody. And I think the assumption would be that would help you accept your queerness and normalize it. And it did the opposite. And you retreated from being social in your studies.
Yeah.
Can you talk about what was going through your mind during that point?
Yeah. I mean, so there was the religious aspect where I was like, oh, I'm sinning right now. And so that was very difficult. He was also a person of faith. He had a different faith than me, but he sort of segmented his life. And he would go out and do like proselytizing on the street on like Saturday mornings and then like come back to the dorm and like we'd hang out and watch Diana Ross movies. And that was what we did. And I did not understand how to either separate or integrate my life. And so there was just constant conflict. I think I came about it, I put the cart before the horse. I was not trying to rectify the splits that I found in my life at that point. I was like, I guess I should have a boyfriend. I don't know. Maybe this will help me to feel more loved. And instead of saying like, oh, I'd like to actually put my full self out into the world. So yeah, it completely blew up my face. I thought that I was going to hell. I thought that I was ruining my life. I was really ruining my college experience. It was a mess. It was a hot mess. And, getting a boyfriend has rarely been the solution to a problem, which is unfortunate because I feel like it should be.
And same with coming out, right?
Yeah.
I would love to believe that like if you have depression and then you come out, your depression's cured.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think like in the popular imagination, that's kind of like what's been represented on screen.
Yeah.
And yet, as you know, that was like not the case as well.
Yeah.
You write very openly about like mental health struggles.
Yeah.
Is that something that you just like believe you'll have to be like working with and dealing with your entire life?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. The first person I think, or the second person I think in the acknowledgements is my therapist, Brian. I am obsessed with Brian. And I am really grateful that I have therapy and that I have insurance through my husband's job that allows me to go to therapy. I don't think that I will ever be on the other side of any of these things because I don't think that it's an on-off switch. I think that it's part of being a person. And that's sort of one of the acceptance of that, I think, is key for me to letting myself be in the center of my own story as opposed to this like weird aberration that like was depressed and religiously like stunted and not out and then like came out and got into an interracial relationship and like hung out with my parents and everything's great now. Everything is great now. But also like I spent the 2 years of this book deeply, deeply depressed and like sitting down in front of my computer and being like, let's write some jokes. And that's just what it is, And that's okay.
Because we talk about curing depression and maybe we should just be talking about like how to like recognize it faster and like work with it and not like shame yourself for it.
Right. I mean, it's interesting. At the beginning of this book, in the introduction, I asked the question like, what if instead of it gets better, what if it just keeps getting? Which was a question I used to be very afraid of. I was like, okay, if it doesn't get better, am I doing it wrong? If I come out and I get in a relationship and I still realize that like my life isn't perfect. Am I a bad queer person? Did I fail at queerness? And that's not the case. I am living a much better experience of life, having had therapy with 3 therapists now for on and off for the last 5 or 6 years. I'm a different person. That person isn't cured, and that's important to me. I think it's because if I'm cured, one, that's not possible, and two, that means I was broken before, and I respect the person that I was too much to say like, no, I was just a broken piece of crap.
And so like 2 or 3-ish years ago when you were like just selling the book and starting that process, was that like a big decision for you to say like, oh God, I'm writing a book and like part of that is like that I am gay and like I have to write about that? Or were you fine with it by then?
I don't know. Like I realized that like strangers would have opinions about my relationship, and that was very strange. And I realized that if I was going to do this book, honestly, I didn't have the option of living sort of a segregated life where I was like, oh, if I run into like some person from my old church in the grocery store, like they only know, I don't have to like mention I'm married to a man. Like this weird, like little mini closeting, that can happen sometimes. I didn't want to live like that. So it felt a little bit like I was choosing to expose myself, but also more importantly, it felt like I was acknowledging what was plainly obvious, which is that like I wasn't fooling anybody. I'm not living a segregated life, like nobody doesn't know that I'm queer.
Are there also feelings about you being married to a white person?
I'm sure, yeah. And I was very sensitive to that. And I talked with my husband about that early on. I said, some people will have an opinion about me or an opinion about the two of us together. I wanted to like run that by him and ask, is it okay to be exposed in this way? And he was like, well, it's up to you. But yeah, their opinions don't really affect who we are.
It's the truth, right?
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know what to do with that. And I do have still a little bit of trepidation about people sort of having an opinion about like the choices that I've made. A lot of times there are people, and I think this is a really valid feeling, that people in the Black community who can sometimes feel like this frustration or confusion about interracial relationships. I totally get it. I also understand that I didn't seek out to date a white man and marry a white man. I didn't say, this is what I'm into, this is my thing. So yeah, it feels a little bit like it's ripe for misinterpretation, but I also feel like people are going to have that opinion regardless of whether I tell them about it in a book or they just see a picture on Instagram. Like, what can I do?
Yeah. And I feel like that was a weird question, but I also just like plainly like don't know if like people still have like ill feelings about like interracial relationships.
Yeah.
Because to me, it's such a non-issue.
Right. I don't know that would be ill feelings. I mean, some people absolutely do, whatever. But I think that more commonly, there's just a sort of a question about what the desires behind an interracial relationship are in both directions. Like when I meet other Black people who are in interracial relationships, more often than not, we always share the experience of like going through that person's like dating history, like looking at photos on Facebook or whatever, just to see if like it's a trend, like because you don't want to be tokenized. There's a lot of internal things that make it a complicated experience sometimes. And I think there's a lot of external things that people are still sort of sorting through. I love to see depictions of Black love, particularly Black queer love, because we don't see it very much. I think about the movie Moonlight. I love Moonlight so much. And I understand the choice to sort of give them this moment of physical intimacy at the end, but not have them kiss. But I also was just like, kiss each other.
Because how many other movies have you seen like two Black men kissing?
I can't. I struggle to think of.
Yeah. Which leads me to the issue of like Hollywood gives us like race and it's Black and white only.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's the other thing. I'm like, I am hard pressed to think of like a Black man and a Thai man, in a relationship on screen. And part of it's just sort of like we only get but so much. And so the things that we get aren't as diverse as we are. And I think sometimes when people push back on individual relationships, in reality, what they're really pushing back on is the scarcity of our representation. I can't represent all of queerness and all of different iterations of queer relationships. And the fact is, I met a white man at the LGBTQ community center in Philadelphia, and we accidentally fell in love and got married, It's a very tricky thing. And it's a thing that we ask people in minority positions to do much more than we ask people in majority positions. So we ask queer people to to identify and queerness. We don't say, we might say to like whoever, Stephen King or whatever, like, where's the more queer characters? But like, a queer novelist, you're like, why is this about a straight couple? How dare, And we're allowed to write about whatever we want. And we do the same thing with racial minorities. We are tasked with being representative and also with pushing diversity forward. And I think I want to do that. But I also want to do that in a way that is fair and true, because it's a responsibility that all of us have, not just people who are in minority positions.
And that was R. Eric Thomas. His extremely funny and wonderful new book is called The Kings of Be More. The Kings of Be More comes out on May 31st, and he'd probably want me to note that you can pre-order the book right now. This original interview was recorded when his memoir came out in 2020. That memoir is called Here For It. And if you enjoy the interview, we have a small favor to ask, and that is to please post about the show on social media, take a screenshot of this and text your friends, help us spread the word. It is the biggest way you can help our show continue to make new episodes. So take out your phones right now. I'll wait. Still waiting. No, really, take out your phone. Do it, please. Okay, thank you so much. I'm really fulfilling that gay drama queen stereotype here. We are brought to you by The Advocate magazine in partnership with GLAAD. I'm Jeffrey Masters on Twitter and Instagram at JeffMasters1. I'll see you there. Bye.